And I guess Craig isn't coming?
Don't know.
I haven't heard
Didn't
from
hear
him.
from
I'll
him.
text.
All right, well, why don't we get started?
Recording in progress.
Thank you.
Okay, let's call the meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Mr. Januzzo,
Here.
Mrs. Rogers,
Here.
Mrs. Barnes,
Here.
Mrs. Barney,
Here.
Mr. Roach.
Okay, can we have a motion to approve the October 18th minutes?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januzzo,
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers,
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes,
Aye.
Mrs. Barney,
Aye.
Mr. Roach.
Okay. We have a motion to approve the November 1st special meeting minutes.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januzzo,
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers,
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes,
Aye.
Mrs. Barney,
Aye.
Mr. Roach.
Okay. I'm going to turn the meeting over to Roseanne and let her finish all the motions for the rest of the meeting, because I think it'll be easier since she's there in person. So I'm going to turn it over to Roseanne.
Okay, next on the agenda is the engineer's report with Kevin.
Yes. First item is the Lawrence project update. We had a conference call today with Penvest and reviewed options as far as bidding schedule, how it falls in line with Penvest, and it was a good call. They recommended a couple different options to consider. I did talk to Dawn earlier and Mike. The first option is, and it's on tonight's agenda, authorize the project to go out to bid tonight. We would advertise it tomorrow. Bids would come in December 9th. And because Penvest would like us to have bids in hand in order for them to consider the increase on January 18th. So I do have the advertisement this evening, and we would put a notice out to the bidders as well as we put in the paper, same as normal, Mike would. And that would put us on track with Penvest, that you would have pending bids on the 9th of December. We also have on tonight's agenda the letter that we would send on the 9th or the 12th in for the increase. It has to be based on the bids itself. And we're going to put in the bids that there is a 50-day award time clock, so that it puts us a week and a half after the 18th meeting in January, and then we'd have a meeting to award the contracts that next week. So somewhere around 25th of January, we'd have a meeting to award the contracts. That way, you know you've got the increase. Dual path, we're also going to have the meeting with the bonding company and walk through the process now on what a bond would look like if we needed $4 million, if something happened at Penvest and give you the increase, so we don't lose a bunch of months. Have that for your December meeting, because we'll know for it if there has been any issues, and if we need to go the bonding route, we'll have that as a plan B. We did review that with Penvest today as, what's that look like if you did go with a bond instead of Penvest? And it's actually less cumbersome with Penvest because you're not asking them for anything. You just have to have the bond and have the money from the bond in your account. Have your bond counsel work through all the details as far as who's in first position as far as lending before you close on the bond. You get the money, and then you go to closing with with Penvest. So there's no Penvest meetings, there's no special approvals with that route. We were gonna have that meeting 2.5 weeks ago or so. We called it off because we thought Penvest was gonna be the vehicle. Penvest is still pretty sure they're gonna be the vehicle, and we talked with them today, and they said they have not, to their knowledge, they haven't turned anybody down for an increase such as this, which I thought was good. When the attorney was on the call a couple weeks ago, she kind of threw up some red flags with that, but, you know, talking with our representative, he said in his time there, they've never said no. So, but I think since we're in our third process, it makes sense to understand what the bond would look like, so that if December 15th, Penvest calls back and says, you're not going to be on the agenda mid-January, there's these other 5 pieces of paper we need, then we know we have to go with a bond, what that timing looks like, and we'll have that from the bond agent to know, okay, what's the financing look like, what's the repayment, all that, and we can show that to you at the December meeting. So I think it's prudent to do that at this point, just because we kind of get 5 steps with Penvest, and then, you know, somebody in the background raises their hand and says, we need one more thing. Right now, if we had bond money in place, we could move forward no matter what with the current approval from Penvest. So, so the motions that's on tonight is just to authorize us to put the project out to bid. I have the advertisement with me. We'll upload the documents tomorrow to the site and notify the bidders. Open bids on the 9th at 11 and 11:15. We just have to send a bid tab and the letter that you have on the agenda for the amount of the increase that we're requesting. So we have to take whatever the numbers are in the bid tab and repopulate it into the Penvest table and then send them that information for their meeting. He said as long as he has that by the 12th, they'll get it reviewed and they'll get it on the agenda for the January 18th Penvest meeting. So, so we should have a positive indication by the December meeting, A, what the bids were, and are we okay with Penvest at that point, or are we going the bond route? So December meeting, we'll know. You won't do any awards until the 4th week in January. But we should be awarding contracts then and under construction by April. So our memo, the first 4 or 5 lines are incorrect because they didn't clear that up with us till today. So, so we will be on the street faster than we thought. We thought we were going to be in January, but it's going to be tonight. He asked if we could do it, and the answer is yes. I mean, the documents aren't going to change. It's what we put out to bid before. So there's no reason we can't do it. So
We're not making any changes for the EPA guidelines for the,
that gets added in. Yeah,
That does.
the WB, MBE stuff, we got to send the notices out tomorrow. All the letters, that went in the ad today. That's actually in here
Okay.
now. Yes, that's in. And then Davis-Bacon on the other contract, and a couple of the other grants that were pending. We put some language in for those too. So there's another grant on here tonight, H2O. We're actually applying for $2.5 million for phase 1. You may not know if you get that until halfway through the contract. You can reimburse out of that grant. It doesn't have to be part of the bid document. A lot of times projects have been built when that funding comes through. We did have a few conference calls this week. That fund is supposed to get a lot of money into it. So we're very hopeful that that and CFA, there's going to be money come into this project from it, since this is a high priority project, and it's getting rid of wildcat sores. So there's actual specific sections in that grant. So it was a popular grant when it came through the last time because you could reimburse out of it. So, you know, that's why you see phase 1 on that agenda tonight for that resolution. So,
Kevin, so there's no misunderstanding. We're going forward with the, how much is it, 12 or 13 million that Penvest has already approved for us, correct?
yes,
And the only thing that's in question, whether we go bond or Penvest, is the whatever number it might turn out to be, with the whether it's 4 million or whatever number over what the existing Penvest allotment is, right?
correct.
Okay.
Yep.
I just wanted to clarify that so the rest of the board understands.
Yeah, it's just the delta, and it's kind of belt and suspenders to start down the bond path. I think we should, just so we know. The other thing is,
Right.
uh, typically we're having a continual conversation with bond counsel, with the authorities, but since the market went a little haywire, bond counsel doesn't come in, they really don't talk to you. I think we should just find out what the delta is anyway, just so we know if we have another project that comes up and we need money, where are we at today? And then in 6 months, we can check in again. Like each year, we should speak to bond counsel to make sure if we need money, what's it look like to borrow money today through a bond? Because in all of our clients, I haven't had a presentation probably in a year.
Yeah. And, Dawn, if I may, and Roseanne, if I may, by discussing matters with the bond counsel in the context of the Lawrence project, I think is prudent. You obviously will make your decision on which way you want to go, and may very well be dictated by what happens with Penvest. But from a big picture standpoint, if you were looking at the finances of Cecil Township Municipal Authority from 30,000 feet, you might want to also use this opportunity to have Sean, paint a little bit of a picture of where you're going here over the next handful of years, 5 to 10 years with Penvest and or with additional bond where you are projected to go. And Sean's pretty good at that, and I think that he can give you a nice overview. And I think it's a wise thing to look into the bond, not just for the reason of Lawrence, but for the reason of the big picture. So that's all. And I guess from the standpoint of discussing matters with Sean over the next, I assume you mean Sean for
Yeah, Garen.
Garen.
Yeah.
Well, mechanically, Dawn or Roseanne, you may want to think about how you want to do that. Do you want to have a Zoom conference with him, which, might be able to include Dawn more easily, or do you want him to deal just with one or two of you or whatever? But I think it would be prudent to give him a little prep time, and he should be able to address both issues.
Yeah, I figured I think the call we were going to have a couple weeks ago had a group of us on there, and then Ramel and there was people on there that's from Sean's side, his financial people. So
Yeah.
I think that team needs to be on the same page on what we're looking for.
So is that consistent, if you're looking to get something like that set up? And so, okay,
I think that's worthwhile to do that.
okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That's something you'll do to set that up? or-
Yeah, I'll work through Chris if that's good.
Yep, that's fine.
last time, and then everybody was on that first email. We'll just reconstitute that and put it out. So
Right, and if it comes to be that a quorum, so to speak, assembles for such a meeting, we could just refer to that as a offline executive session, and you can announce that at the start of the next meeting. That's all. And there's justification for it being executive session because it's fundamentally real estate acquisition at the base of the financing, which you have done, in part at least, through rights-of-ways. So you can justify it being an executive session. Okay.
one other update, we did, when we had our Penvest call, we did talk with them about, we hadn't received any comments back from DEP on the amendment. They offered to nudge that for us, and they did that, and about 20 minutes later, we did receive 18 comments in an email. Highlight this, do that, change this module, nothing big, and he said he will work to push that through the process because it's his pile that they're working from, and he said he can help with that. So we thought that was very encouraging as well, that he offered that, and then that did happen. So, any questions on any of that? If not, everything else is on the agenda for motions.
Okay. I guess we can start with the first things you identified. Do we have a motion to authorize advertisements of bids for contract number 21 STP1 treatment plant and lift station Construction for the rebid.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Next, do we have a motion to authorize advertisement of bids for contract number 2017-06, construction of Village of Lawrence sanitary sewers and appurtenances for the rebid?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Excuse me, Mike, just for the record, and Dawn, you may not know from your position on video that Mr. Roach is here, and I had an opportunity to talk to him briefly and filled him in on what he missed in the few minutes before he got here. That's all.
Thank you.
Okay, that motion carries. The next motion is to authorize execution of the revised letter of responsibility to Penvest. Do we have a motion for this?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
That motion carries. We have two more motions relative to this project. Motion to approve resolution to apply for a PA Small Water and Sewer Program in the amount of $500,000 for the Village of Lawrence Sewage Facilities Phase 2 project. Do we have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Next, do we have a motion to approve resolution to apply for the H2O Pennsylvania Water Supply Sanitary Sewer and Stormwater Projects Program in the amount of $2.5 million for the Village of Lawrence Sewage Treatment Facilities Phase 1 project?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
There are several other motions included in the engineer's report, not associated with the Lawrence Sewage Treatment Facilities plant. The first one is the motion to authorize McConnell Trails Phase 3A bond reduction number 6 in the amount of $133,685.26.
Yes, they did submit in their request, and we did review it, and the items have been completed.
Okay, do we have a motion to authorize this?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
The next item on the agenda is the conditional acceptance of sanitary sewers from the McConnell's Trails. And Kevin, I'm assuming that this work has been acceptable in your review?
Yeah, they have a list yet to complete, so we've been doing these conditional acceptances so that they can move on to the next step while they address some of their punch list items, so.
Okay, do we have a motion for this conditional acceptance? This is for Phase 3A, pending completion of all construction testing and administrative requirements.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, next item regarding McConnell's Trails Phase 3A would be a motion to authorize signing of deed easements for this. And
Yes.
Kevin, everything's in order?
Yes, and that goes with the previous motion.
Okay.
It's that same area.
Do we have a motion?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Next item would be for McConnell Trails Phase 3B. We're looking for a motion to approve the sanitary sewer easement and construction agreement for McConnell Trails Phase 3B.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, also for McConnell Trails Phase 3B, we're looking for a motion to approve McConnell Trails Phase 3B set-aside agreement, and this would be in the amount of $437,945.
And our office has reviewed that set-aside agreement, correct? I mean, I think Chris had looked at that, and
Chris has looked at that. Everything was good. She made a few corrections that she wanted in there. They sent it back over to McConnell's Trail. It was acceptable to them, and they have signed the agreement and just would like us to accept it and sign it.
and for everyone's benefit, you know, the phrase set-aside agreement contemplates fundamentally an alternative to a bond like that a contractor would post. And there's the ability to draw down money from a bank account or some financial account that benefits the authority. And some of the nuances that Chris or I would look at would be to make sure that there aren't any strings attached to that it's an on-demand request, et cetera. And the set-aside agreements are becoming somewhat more common, but we had reviewed it. I just wanted to mention, that's all.
Okay, thank you, Ramel. Do we have a motion to approve the set-aside agreement for McConnell Trails Phase 3B?
I'll make that motion.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, I think that concludes the engineer's report and any associated motions, unless anyone else has anything.
Yes, I have one more thing that was brought to our attention. There was one that was left off. TOA had sent over a deed of sanitary easement signing for Phase 4. It was not put on there, so I would like to have a motion to amend the agenda to include signing of the deed of easement for Phase 4, manhole 3.8 to manhole 4.9. This will make sure that we keep the process moving forward. So we would need a motion to amend the agenda to include that.
I spoke with Mike before the meeting, and under the new law, that's acceptable. You'll have to do a motion to amend the agenda, then a motion to act upon that which Mike suggests, and he'll post that accordingly.
Okay, I'll make that motion to amend the agenda.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
And now we are looking to see if we have a motion to approve TOA request for a signed deed.
Signing of the deed of easement for Phase 4, manhole 3.8 to manhole 4.9.
Thank you.
I'll make that motion as stated.
I'll second it.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januso?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, next on the agenda is Ramel with the solicitor's report.
Thank you. First, I wanted to mention that I believe our board is aware, directly or indirectly, that CHJA had given notice of a rate increase. That's not surprising. All involved over the last few years expected that there would be a rate increase. And as we have the litigation pending now with Canonsburg-Houston Joint Authority, I thought it'd be appropriate to have all the managers on a conference call that were involved in a litigation. And there's really going to be no objection to the rate increase. There wasn't any appetite on the part of any of the other managers of the other municipal entities to challenge the most recent rate increase. So just to let you know that the responsibility of CHJA is to give advance notice, which they have done, of the implementation, which doesn't take place until the beginning of next year. But I just wanted to let you know that that didn't go unnoticed, that all the communities have digested it, and there doesn't appear to be any real pushback on that right now. As regards to pending litigation, which is the third piece of litigation, you may remember I previously summarized the first. I'm sorry.
I have a question about the rate increase. Is it in line with what we had heard or we were anticipating?
Slightly higher than what was anticipated. I think there's some suggestion that given the economy right now and some of the issues that everyone seems to be facing, it's slightly higher, but not significantly higher. So this is the third. I'm sorry, Michael.
I'm sorry, Ramel. I just wanted to let you know, Mr. Genoso, I did send that over to everyone whenever we received that email. The rate increase of January 1st, 2023, the monthly charge will go from $7.10 per 1,000 gallons to $8.66 per 1,000 gallons, which is about a 21.97% increase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit of good news on that.
I mean, that's significant overall.
Sure.
A little bit of good news on that, Dawn. When we did the rate analysis 2 years ago with Walter, he included a slightly higher number than that. That we included. So the analysis for the rates are good because he anticipated it to be slightly more for whatever reason. So we did carry a slightly higher number. So it ended up being a little bit over what that is. That was good.
So he covered what others were not, I guess. But the third piece of litigation, which is now pending, there's a motion that's going to be argued before the court on in Washington County on December the 1st. It's a procedural motion, and we'll report on the aftermath of that at next meeting. Two other items. Ms. McCullough continues to send her emails and is continuing with her litigation. And in keeping with Mr. Giannuso's and mine's recommendation several years ago, that what we have done as regards Ms. McCullough has all been in public. We haven't had any executive sessions, and we've been completely transparent on everything we talk about regarding her. And I each month give the board an update on what she sends, and that you have. Mr. Giannuso, Michael said he would be able to get that to you.
I'll be waiting breathlessly for it.
Good reading.
The other matter I wanted to mention is the shredding contract. Shannon, you may be covering that later in the meeting, and we can wait on that. So that concludes my report, Roseanne.
All right, thank you. Business manager report, Shanna.
Okay, your packet included the financial reports for September 2022. Any questions? Nope.
Nope.
If that's all you have, Shanna, do we have a motion to approve resolution? Oh, do you want to talk about the shredding? Sorry.
I recommend that we go with Allegheny Records Destruction. They are $3.60 per box, and we have approximately 90 boxes that need destroyed. Their quote was pretty short and sweet. There was not much to it. That's who I recommend that we go with.
Does anybody have any questions for Shanna on
I have a question. This is from Rommel primarily. There was included a list of documents and the time periods and so forth. Is that okay with you? Is basically my question.
Yes, and in addition, on two fronts. One, when we reviewed the other competitive agreements, there was onerous language in the other ones that made them unacceptable. And my understanding is that the protocol for destruction that's been discussed, I believe, Shanna, between you and Chris on the existing resolution that you have for destruction. Is that what you're?
Okay.
Yeah. So, Shanna, I guess just to back up a step, in the past, there was a resolution or a motion on how you destroy records consistent
Okay.
with the law. And I think what the request was that the motion be conditioned upon Chris and Shanna agreeing on the proper protocol for that, if that's okay. Okay?
Okay.
The protocol for destruction of the records themselves.
Is there a retention policy that we follow?
My understanding there is, and whether or not that, we just want to make sure that that is followed, and it's followed correctly. And that's all, that's why the condition would be that the solicitor and Shanna agree on that.
Okay.
That's all.
Attached in your packets this evening, Shanna had the retention schedule along with the list of documents. And basically, Ramel, you are correct. That's what we would, or she was recommending, is to go ahead pending review, okay, that you're okay with it. We have the resolution that we have used in the past for the destruction of the documents worded the same way, just pending everything. If the review comes back good, this way we don't have to wait another month to try to get this stuff taken care of. So
Right.
that's what we were looking to do.
So we just requested that motion be with that condition, that's all.
Okay.
Okay, so do we have a motion to approve the resolution for document record destruction as listed on Exhibit A, as outlined in our discussion tonight?
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Januzo?
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers?
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes?
Aye.
Mrs. Barney?
Aye.
Mr. Roach?
Aye.
Okay, next on the agenda is Mike with the authority manager's report.
Thank you. I just have a couple items to update everyone on. We had an ongoing issue over at Cherry Brook and the blower control panel. We were able to diagnose and resolve that issue. We had a defective motor starter and a couple of the wires were undersized, which was helping to cause heat, and that was what was causing the consistent breakdown there. So we have resolved that, and that problem has gone away. We also had to replace a motor starter for the groundwater pump at Miller's Run. This pump is used to do water around the tanks to keep them from floating. So we got that replaced, and that's taken care of and back working again. Item 3, the doors for the grid handling building we talked about last month. They're really in poor shape. Walt had included $25,000 in the capital budget for replacement. I have still only received one estimate from Acme Door and Hardware, which was $15,228. That's for replacement of 3 doors, and these doors are fiberglass, which would hold up much better in the corrosive environment than the steel doors. At the board's pleasure, I can try to get some more quotes, or if we would like to go with steel doors again, I can have them quote steel doors as a comparison. But my recommendation is to, if we can get a couple more quotes, I would go with the fiberglass doors so we don't have to replace these again in 10 to 15 years. We should get a lot more longevity out of them. But I just want to give everybody an update on what was going on there. Item 4, we talked about some lab equipment for process control. I've received only pricing from one vendor to date. I'd like to get a couple more prices, so I will have a recommendation at the December meeting. Cool Valley project update. At the last month's meeting, there was some question on the status of this project. The developer's firm did send us over the master utility plan and illustrative plan. They have also provided some preliminary flow data. They really haven't submitted anything formal to the authority regarding this project until this evening. About 5:30, I received a phone call at the office, and he was trying to get a hold of us because we've been having email issues, but they would actually like to move forward with submitting a planning module. I told him that he's welcome to submit that, but there's many other questions that he's going to have to answer. Some of the things are how much flow is going to come into that Maple Run pump station, which would need some upgrades. Who's going to pay for that? There were some easement issues that were in question. So there's a lot of things that are going to have to be answered, but this is the first time that they've actually come forward and requested something formal. So we can get Kevin a copy of the plans and start to work on this, but I wanted to give everybody an update on where that stands. Item 6, we received notice from Pennsylvania American Water that the backflow preventers are due for testing at the Cherry Brook and Miller's Run facilities. I've been able to get these scheduled. They will do these next Wednesday, so this will be taken care of. And item 7, Ramel touched on in his report about the rate increase from Cannonsburg Houston Joint Authority. And that's all I have for my report this evening.
Does anyone have any questions for Mike on his report?
Well, I actually have a question for Romel. Say regarding those doors, how many bids do we actually have to have? How does that work, Romel?
I'm sorry, how many bids for which?
For those doors that we need, we only could get one bid. What if we can only get one bid? What's going to happen then?
Well, I mean, you can go, what's the amount?
It's 15,000.
15,000.
Yeah, I guess if you only get one, then, and assuming you use due diligence to get your amounts, I say you can go with it.
Right, we had a budget
Okay.
of 25,000 for this.
That is correct.
Right.
So it's material,
Yeah.
That
we're
includes,
recommending that material's best. in the
that
corrosive.
price includes the hardware, the frames, the doors, that's everything, and installation.
Mike, maybe what you could do is get a price on the steel doors, see how it compares, and then maybe do some little justification for the file, justifying a difference in price.
I can do that. It's been very hard
And
to
then-
get people to,
And then maybe try to get another bid if you can. I don't know if that's possible on the fiberglass.
I will try to do my due diligence on that. Like you said, we had a couple people that said they were coming out, and they never show up. It's just hard to get people to come out. But like I said, I will do my due diligence and try to get a couple more quotes.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Mike,
Yes.
what about reaching out to somebody independent like Dano Door, or somebody like that has been in business for years and years?
I can take a look at them.
Just give them a call and say, hey, maybe they haven't even seen a bid that was put out, being that they are local, and they got a good reputation as far as I know.
Yeah.
That's fine. I can reach out to them.
Okay.
Good suggestion. Next, review of correspondence. We were given information in our packet. Does anyone have any questions? Okay. Within our packet, we had information on the finances. There are a couple things. We're looking to get a motion to approve payment of the expenses, transfers of funds on the DMR review and approval. Payment of expenses, invoices, and employee payroll.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
Roll call vote.
Mr. Januso,
Aye.
Mrs. Rogers,
Aye.
Mrs. Barnes,
Aye.
Mrs. Barney,
Aye.
Mr. Roach.
Aye.
All right, I don't see anyone in attendance from the public this evening, so it does not appear we have any comments from the floor tonight. With that, if there's nothing else anyone wants to talk about, looking for a motion for adjournment of the meeting.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
John, do you want to do your,
I'm gonna do my usual. Aye, 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 aye.
thank you very much.
Thank everybody. Thanks for being there.
Thank you.
Good night.
Stay warm.
It snowed today. So,
I know.
enjoy.
Take care. Thank you.
So long. Thank you, Jack. Appreciate it.
Recording stopped.
They get hurricanes in Florida. We get snow.